Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me and this wonderful lunch smell. I let it get to smell while I'm up here with you this morning. I was excited to have the opportunity to speak with you about some of the things I'm very passionate about. I've been working with the Grand Rapids Chamber for 15 years in this area. And what many may not be aware of is the Grand Rapids Chamber leads other chambers in the U.S. on the diversity and inclusion work that we do. We were the first chamber in the U.S. to have a division focused on diversity and inclusion. And we feel that it's a business imperative, it's a growth issue for the region. And I want to share a little bit about what that means to our region, but also what that means to you and your success as a realtor. And so when we think about diversity and we think about inclusion and we think about culture, I want to make sure that we understand that there are separate definitions for each of those. And we'll talk about that today. And what we know at the Grand Rapids Chamber is that the face of business and the face of community is changing rapidly. If we think about who we were as a community 10 years ago, we may not have ever suspected we have the growth that we are experiencing now, both in population and also in amenities downtown, and also the ways in which our neighborhoods are growing. One thing that we're sure of is that it's the perspective of the different people that help us grow. Folks that come in that have different experiences than what is familiar to us in West Michigan, those that come from outside of Michigan, those that come from outside the United States, we all bring experiences with us, and it forms the way that we think, it forms the way that we problem solve, and it forms the way that we collaborate. And statistics will show us and studies will show us that regions that attract the most diverse people and work the most collaborative have the most economic success and growth. So we're going to break down a little bit about what that means. Not only is it a strategic priority, it's also something that a lot of our employers are focused on. How do I attract and retain certain talent? Oh, you have, as I say, if you don't have one of these, the PowerPoint is available if you'd like to have the details of it. But if we look at the population trends, some of these may be familiar and some of these may be surprising to you. But of those over the age of 20 or over the age of 70, 20% will be likely racial minorities. And so when we think about that, over the age of 20, 20 will be. But if we look at under the age of 10, 70% will be. So that could impact you in the way that you think about who your client is. Because if the kids under 10 are 70% persons of color, who are their parents? What are their ethnic, cultural needs, experiences, the way in which they feel they need to connect, the way in which they feel they need to collaborate within the community? Those all inform the way in which you would do business. 80 million baby boomers are set to retire over the next 20 years. What does that mean to your industry? We think about what it means in the workforce. 80% retiring, we know the largest replacement of workers is coming from under the age of 25. And with that, they have a whole different way of thinking about the world than the baby boomers, who make up the largest portion of our workforce today. So 75% of new entrants in the workplace will be women and racial minority. Currently, so we think about racial minority, we're talking about people of color. That can be any group and or those that are multiracial, made up of more than one racial group. This is reflecting the growth in the population of global growth as well as U.S. population growth. So what does it mean to us in West Michigan? Why is that important to us? Why are we looking at this? Why is all of West Michigan leading the conversation in Michigan about economic growth as it relates to inclusion? Most businesses and nonprofits are challenged with representing who their clientele are. Changing populations, if we are not representing the changing population, we have to understand and have those similar experiences, whether it's religion, faith, size of families, dimensions of families, the racial groups of the families, the age groups of the families. All of those are coming into play, especially when you're moving in and you're bringing family with you. If you're bringing, if you're in your 50s and you're bringing a parent that's in their 80s and you have a child that's 10, you have 3 different demographics that we need to hit as a community for that family to feel connected, for that family to want to stay here. And what does that mean to us economically? So the companies that, the counties, the companies, and the states that are expanding are those that can engage and keep the talent. So when we think about dimensions of diversity, in the human aspect, there's some that we see and some that we can't see, but they all inform who we are as an individual. If you look at this, this wheel, there are dimensions here, but there's many more. Can you think of one that's not represented on the wheel? If so, just call it out.
The legal status of immigrants.
Okay. Are there any dimensions up here that you would say informs how you think about yourself in the world? Whether it's because of your gender or your age group or the way that you respond in the world. Is it your religion? Is there any in there that you think really influences how you engage in the world, how you see yourself? So can you select, you don't have to say it out loud, but can you select one in which you feel that you're a minority in that category? So folks that come in new, if a lot of these dimensions you can't see right away. You don't pick up, you don't know. And some that are visible, we may respond to and categorize someone based on what we know or what our past experiences are. We're all carrying around differences. So when someone says we're not diverse, they may be speaking about visual diversity, but as you see, every single person is diverse. No person can be in a room with anyone else and have diversity not present. Diversity will always be present. It's the way that we engage the differences is what makes a difference. The ways that we can respond, what we know about differences that we don't reflect ourselves, the way that we engage with those differences, the way we collaborate with those differences, makes a huge impact on who we are as an individual person, because it informs the way we think and what we know and what we're most comfortable with. It informs our workspace, it informs our neighborhoods, it informs our community, and it informs the region. So inclusion is being a part of what everyone else is a part of. So you can say, well, I have a diverse neighborhood, but if you don't engage and everyone feel a part of, you don't have an inclusive neighborhood. If you have a workspace, and maybe you're the only male in that workspace and you don't feel comfortable. There's diversity there, but you haven't been engaged in a way that you feel a part of it. You're losing a piece of that talent. We leave a piece of ourselves outside of work every single day when we can't bring our whole selves to work. If there is anything that we're hiding because of being afraid of being left out, then we're not bringing our whole talent to work. That shows up in the same way in neighborhoods. When neighbors can't interact with one another because they're afraid of their dimensions will not be included and they won't feel a part of a neighborhood, that talks about when folks say, I don't feel welcomed here. It's not that you're not friendly, but not feeling a part of something that everyone else is depicts welcomeness, a sense of inclusion, a sense of belongingness. There are many exit surveys that HR departments have shared generally when we're looking at how do we collectively do better at retaining talent here or bringing talent here. And a piece of what they're saying is folks are exiting and saying, I just couldn't connect. We had a panel discussion. We had 4 large employers on the stage. One specifically recruited from the South to bring in dimensions of diversity they felt they needed for their business model. And in a year, all 10 of those executives had left. So they paid the search firm, they paid the moving costs, they onboarded them into their companies, and the exit poll said, you did a great job onboarding me into the company, but there wasn't anything for my family. And they felt isolated. And when the family's not happy, the worker's not happy. And if the worker has to go out to events in the evening and go to community events in which the family's not engaging, the family has another level of isolation. So we focus on what is it that we can do to help people feel that they're a member of the things that feel important to them. Culture is the way in which we agree to behave together. So you have a culture in a family, you have a culture in a workspace, you have a culture in a region. So there's unspoken rules, and there's rules that are written right out on the wall in a workspace. So if you think about your workspace, the common trends, the common things that you do, the way that you might reference something by using acronyms as opposed to saying the whole name, those are some of those rules of engagement. Some of the things that you said, this is how we do it here. This is what we do. What are some common things in your work environment that defines your culture? That says this is what we do. Common practices. Anybody have coffee mannerisms? You can hang around at the coffee and talk about what you watched last night, or what your kids are doing today, or what's new in the media today. How about dress code? Is that something written or something that everybody just assumes because you can come in and see how people are dressed and what's going on? Those define our culture. Those are agreed upon things, whether we verbally say it out loud or not. And we have that in West Michigan. What are some things that you would say defines West Michigan that generally is acceptable and that people continue to repeat or support? Behaviors, thinking, holidays, celebrations. What are some cultural norms in West Michigan?
I'd say one of the things that's a challenge for people coming in, we're very strong family oriented. I would say that for holidays, families get together. If you're not from the area, where do you connect? Where do you go? Those are big things.
Okay. Families, and if you're not structured around a family center, where do you go during the holidays? Yes.
I think, sometimes, I've heard saying that West Michigan is very conservative community.
Yeah. Yes.
Very strong in faith.
Okay.
Philanthropy, I would add, we should have a strong philanthropic community.
Okay.
Work ethic as well.
All right.
Family-oriented.
Family-oriented. So these are things that aren't necessarily written down, but we know them to be a part of the culture here. Pleasantville.
Pleasantville.
Okay. Tell us more about Pleasantville for those that didn't see the movie.
I live in Pleasantville, and everybody's, hardworking and doing the right thing.
Okay. So what happens when you don't feel like you're inside of those norms? That you're not conservative, or you don't practice a faith that is one of the popular groups, or you don't practice faith at all, or you don't have a family.
You don't belong.
You don't belong. You have a sense of not belonging. What would that mean to your business if you had a client that couldn't have a sense of belonging?
You might move somewhere else.
Has anyone in the room, but just by a show of hands, had been showing someone around to a potential property and They just couldn't see themselves there. I don't see myself living here. I can't see a fit. You might just drive down the street and haven't gotten inside the house yet, and I just don't see a fit here for me. There's a sense of culture, and do I belong? Am I accepted? What will that feel like? So there are small things and large things that help us understand we do or don't belong. Some of these things we say without intention. So micro messages. These are signals that we send through our behavior. We don't mean to do it, but we may do it out of habit, but we may do it intentionally. The rolling of the eyes. Someone rolls their eyes, you say something and they roll your eyes, and you either feel like you've been discounted for what you've shared, or what you've shared doesn't matter, or it's assumed there's something negative about that with that rolling of the eyes. Yes? Sometimes we smile, we nod our heads. Those are all signals as well. Those are little small signals. But sometimes when we send them and it tells people they're not a part of something, that's the difficult thing to be able to measure. But if you have it every single day, someone says good morning to the person beside you, but never you. People ask each other about their day, but never you. Maybe it's because of your skin color, or your sexual orientation, or your religious belief, or your socioeconomics, and you go through your head of why am I not on the inside of this? Why am I feeling outside of this? And the micro inequities, these are the messages that we send that help people feel devalued. The rolling of the eyes, the not including. Some of the things, small differences, invitations saying to the Christmas party, invited to the Christmas party. But if you're not Christian, that can make you feel like you're outside of that and no one's recognizing your dimension of difference or valuing. Instead of calling it a holiday gathering, if you call it a Christmas party, you can wall people out of that experience. The micro affirmations are the things that we can say to make people feel valued, included, or engaged. So when you think about who your clients are or who your clients potentially can be, you might want to make a list in each of these categories to help you to better engage with that client. It might be personal behaviors that you know that you do that might not be acceptable or not be appreciative or might show as being rude in another ethnic group. Write those things down for yourself. Things that would make someone different from yourself feel engaged. Write that down. If it's religion, sexual orientation, age, those with disabilities, multidimensional families, think about those and be very conscious of how you address that person. And as you practice and practice, that becomes a part of your norm. It becomes a part of your filter. It's just something that becomes everyday common for you to do. Although we call them micro, they have huge impacts over time. So cultural competency, this really is talking about an ability that you can develop. It's a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, policies that come together in a system. Well, what it really talks about is being able to work effectively together. You will not arrive at cultural competency and be there. That saying about the culture is constantly changing. So you're constantly trying to keep yourself informed of who's coming in, what's the change, what are the demographic change, what are the dimensions in the workplace, how are people spending money, how do they value the spaces in which they live, the importance around amenities, all of those things are about culture. So being aware, being able to apply that information is what cultural competency refers to. There's also terminology about cultural intelligence. That's knowing something, not always being able to respond to it appropriately, but knowing what it is and working towards competency. So economic inclusion and growth, how does inclusion and culture play on that? So for most businesses today, there's awareness of your market. Who's buying? What are the trends? What's changing? Why does that matter to me? Many businesses look at relocating or expanding. Statistically, they're looking for areas in which it is diverse and is culturally competent. Diversity is present in all the dimensions that reflects the workforce or the customer that they're seeking, and that the community engages them in a way that is productive. So when you look at companies that are wishing to come here, those are all things that are being considered in the relocation issues. So just growth. We had two gentlemen here. It is a book called Just Growth. And when the word just is referring to justice, that you don't want to just grow, but you want to do that in a just way, including all people in the ability to grow, to gain to participate in the growth of the economics. So Dr. Benner and Dr. Manuel both came here and spoke in Grand Rapids. They've been studying Grand Rapids for more than 30 years. And they're talking about the demographic changes and the way different groups have been included in economic growth. For 20 years, we were one of the 20 different regions leading the U.S. And over the last 10 years, we've declined so noticeably that they're coming here to study what's going on. So we're seeing economic growth in some pockets and a greater decline in others, and the gap is growing. So we have a broader gap of the haves and the have-nots, and the economic growth is only happening in certain regions. And from their economic study, it talks about how a region suffers from that. And so many in the business community together are having conversations, looking at this data, cross-referencing this to other data to say, what do we know together and what can we do about it?
Is that specific to the state of Michigan?
It is specific to West Michigan.
How many people mean there's Dr. Manuel Pastor,
Mhm.
Dr.
Benner.
What are
Yes.
some of the reasons that's happening here?
We looked at the population trend and growth. And let me see, I might have a slide that talks about that. And so with our population's trends changing, as the boomers leave with that group, they were the most wealthy group, and the population coming in is the most racial and ethnic diverse, which has the lowest economic means. And so we're seeing this widening gap. And so that impacts housing, schools, street repair, stores within communities, all of those things. And so when you look at the vitality of a neighborhood and you compare it to another neighborhood that has a higher socioeconomic status, they have more amenities. The schools look better. They have different graduation rates. And all of those come into play. When a corporation looks to come here, they're not looking at the difference in the demographics, they're looking at a whole. So what's the populations in general?
Michigan or West Michigan?
West Michigan. West Michigan. So Detroit was not doing as well as we were doing for those 20-year spans. And so as we started to decline, it started raising the attention of the researchers. And so they're saying, but you have so much philanthropy here, and you have so much growth in infrastructure. What's going on? And so they're here to ask us those questions. They've been here for 2 years interviewing different communities, different business leaders, different neighborhoods, school districts, and we will be included in their next book. Yes?
I have a question. How does it correlate to just a recent report which I read about West Michigan being under the top 5 with regard to economic growth? I mean, I understand the overall picture because Detroit, I mean, that has an enormous impact on the 70% of the economic power goes away with automotive going out of business. But
Yes.
because of West Michigan,
Yes.
I'm surprised.
Yes. So I don't know if I have all of the slides, but I have Dr. Benner's slides, and he was here He's been here 3 times. He'll present again. But he'll give you data points on the map so you can actually see the regions that have grown and then have shrunk again, where there are businesses and there's jobs and the populations have grown and the populations have shrunk again. And then you look at schools, home ownership, level of debt, underemployed, and you lay that on top, and then you can see the disparities within the different regions.
I just want to mention, Dr. Manuel Pastor came here about a month ago, and I did hear him speak, and he does have his slideshow available. He's from California, so if you Google him, you can get his full information, and he just talked about Michigan is a great place for investors, but not for the newcomers coming in.
And if you Google Just Growth, they have a website for Just Growth. You can purchase the book on there, but you can get portions of the book is available online, and the slide deck. Typically, there's about 45 to 50 slides in that. But he often comes back to the community. One or the other of the co-authors come back to the community. We'll be working with them ongoing. So if you're curious and you want more, just contact me at the chamber and we can flag you, or I can send it to the Realtor Association so that you know when he's in town. So some of the indicators that we were talking about, here's some of them. White Americans' net worth is 20 times that of African Americans and 18 times that of Latinos. Now this is the U.S. statistics, and this begins tracking from 1984 to current date. So what happens is, at different times we were doing better here, and now we're doing worse than the average. And that's where the study comes in. If you're above and within 10 years to less than 20 years, we start dropping in that. Why? What's happening? The median wealth for white households, it's $113,000. For Hispanics, it's $6,300, and for black households, $5,700. So when we look at
What does median wealth mean?
Savings.
Does that mean net worth, or is it annual?
So you take in the group in which you're studying, you take that in, you subtract all of that to get the net worth, and then to see what is available to spend.
Net worth?
Yeah.
That include the homeowners?
Yes. 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 So what the Census Bureau is telling us is that this, the black-white wealth gap is the widest since the census has been tracking it. Today it's the widest that has ever been. Yeah. So when we think about, or you may hear about supplier diversity or vendor diversity. And I have heard many times in my presentation that there's individuals that view supplier diversity as a handout. What supplier diversity was developed for by the federal government is to make sure the federal government was dispersing the money it was spending. And so if you get a contract with the federal government, you have to prove that you are spending an X percent of that with diverse businesses. Women, minority-owned, veteran-owned, those with disabilities, any in the protected class. So when you hear vendor diversity, supplier diversity, it is talking about just that, making sure the money that's being spent is dispersed. Companies that do not do business with the federal government still find this a useful tool, because what it does is build up some of the gaps that we see here by spending with companies that are owned by a diverse owner. So the government has diversity as the definition, but when they say minority business, they're referring to a person of color. They'll have minority business, women business, veteran business. So there's a variety of categories in which you fall. They're tracking how much money the federal government spends. corporations are finding that, one, it enters into a target market for them. They're their customers. Also, they want those populations to thrive. They need the diversity in the region. And so they do their part by making sure that they have diverse spend. This does not mean that you don't have to be competitive. Actually, all statistics show us that supplier diversity programs drives down the cost of goods and services because it makes it more competitive. You have more people bidding on the same job. So you have an opportunity not to just look at cost, but you also look at delivery, you look at quality, you have an opportunity to negotiate and to make sure that you're not tied into one vendor and all of a sudden the vendor goes out of business and now the whole line stops. Or you don't have that item that you need any longer, or the one grocery store goes out of business in town and it's hard to sell homes there because they don't have the infrastructure necessary. That's the benefit of supplier diversity. So we look at talent development, talent attraction. The Chamber spends a lot of time on this issue. It happens to be, it falls into my area of work for the Chamber, but it is one of the things that we collaborate heavily with within the region. And I was just reminded as I looked down at my notes, one of the things I want to go back and talk about, minority-owned business enterprises. It is the fastest growing segment of business in the United States. The fastest growing. They generate more than $500 billion in annual revenue and employ over 4 million employees in the United States. So again, just another point, it is not about a handout. It's actually an economic stimulant. So in the Grand Rapids Chamber, we think about talent pipeline. We have 2,800 companies that are members of the Chamber. 80% of those companies, 50 or less. So we're really focused on small business and what's helped small business keep that bright talent that they need here. Whatever category it is, how do we help them keep it here? So one of the things is we offer connection services. We help people connect where it's important for them to connect. Spectrum Health calls us often. They have physicians they're interviewing. Sometimes they're interviewing physicians that will accept a position to say, I will come and work at Spectrum in 3 years from today. They are sourcing that far ahead for physicians because of the growth that's happening on the medical mile. There's a collaborative effort now between the hospitals that a person can come here and they understand through Talent 2025. If it doesn't work out at Spectrum, I know that I have an opportunity with the other health entities here. And with that, it's attracting more people looking to move here because there's other places that they can move within their industry. The furniture business are also collaborating to do similar things. So what happens when you have a person come and they're bringing a spouse, a partner, a family member with them that's not employed? We need to get them quickly connected into the community so that the family feels that they have a sense of belongingness. So with that, we provide different after-hour activities and luncheon activities as well. We have specific groups. We have groups for multiracial folks. It can be, we target people of color because they're within the minority in the population, but is open to anyone that wants to make that connection. We found most often that those groups are majority minority, meaning there's more white participants than there are participants of color because the white community wants access to make relationships, to understand what's going on in different groups they don't belong in. We do the same thing with religion groups. We work with the different churches. We help people transition in. We make connections with that, and we have had some meaningful opportunities to have dialogue in workspace about how do you make a work environment conducive to multi-faith communities of workforce. We have a gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, LGBT professional network at the Chamber as well. We launched that this year. It's called OutPro. We have monthly connection events. We have employers calling us saying we're recruiting. Can you please set up a group lunch so individuals can talk? They want to know, is there really a space for him, her, them in West Michigan based on the stereotypes that project we're conservative, we're not welcoming. So employers are using this to help onboard families, professionals. We use it to give professionals a place to connect. It's educational sometimes it's social, sometimes it's community updates. It depends. We have a volunteer crew that sets the agenda and recruits the speakers, and sometimes it's just purely social. It is open to all. We have LGBT professionals and we have those that are supporters attending the events. Typically we get about 75 each month. We have over 500 followers. Yeah.
Are these advertised like at the chamber website?
Yes, it's on the chamber website. It's in the newsletter.
What's it called, lunches or?
Well, that's called OutPro. You can look up MAP, M-A-P. We have something for millennials as well. And we have another program called Inside Grand Rapids that I'll speak about in a moment as well. But all of those talent groups we have activities for. And we engage the talent for the talent to tell us what's important to them, what helps them feel connected. And then we bring the resources together to make that happen. Some of the things that we do is we bring workforce together and really talk about the critical issues that's happening culturally in West Michigan that helps people feel connected, or things that are helping them feel like they don't belong here. And we try to figure them out. We have panels, we talk about it, we talk about the data points. It's not just about the anecdotal, but we're really looking at what are the facts here and what can we do and how can we use your voice and your experience to make this region a much more inviting place to live. So some of the things that we do here inside Grand Rapids, you might have heard of it referred to as IGR. It's a one-day tour of Grand Rapids. It's done 3 times a year. We typically have about 20 people that participate. Employers send new folks, those they're recruiting, anyone that is advancing within their career at the company, and then we have those that have lived there their whole lives and they want to know more about Grand Rapids, and it's the inside track. So it includes a tour, it includes a brief history piece, but then we do hard hat tours. We go into buildings that are being renewed from the inside out that you might not even know demolition is happening from the outside. So we just went through the Morton House. Is anyone familiar with the Morton House downtown? Mm-hmm. So we did a hard hat tour. And parts of that building had been boarded up for 40 years with no exposure. And so we got to go through all of that a year ago, when inside they actually had bulldozers working and you couldn't see it from the street. And we've seen the blueprints. We've seen some of the safes that were in the walls that hadn't even been opened yet. It was pretty cool. And what we were able to do with Rockford Construction is they showed us the raw space, and then we got to see the designs in which they thought the space was going to be used, how it was going to be used, where they come up with the design, how they canvassed the neighborhood and looked at all of the demographics, and they looked at the economic points to figure out what would be inside this building. And then they said, they just did a presentation at our breakfast series. They've been putting this plan together for 10 years of all these buildings that they were going to bring back. And then they showed us all the information that told them what they would do with these buildings. And housing and residence was one of the contributing factors to that. That's included in a tour. We have panels. We just did a space of new workspace. Who's working collaboratively? What are the kind of spaces? We went into Spectrum, and we got to work in one of their labs where they do problem solving. They gave the group a problem to solve, and you had to figure out how to do that collectively. We have looked at politics, we've looked at healthcare, we've looked at education. Every single time it's something different. So if you have a client that's looking to connect, that might be an option for them. If you want to know more, if you want the inside track to Grand Rapids, that might be something that you'd be interested in. It is offered 3 times a year, and each session changes every single year.
And you just sign up?
Yeah, you just sign up.
Anybody can sign up?
Anybody can sign up.
How do you find out about it?
Grand Rapids website, grandrapids.org. Or you can contact me and say, what's the latest? You can get our newsletter whether you're a member or not. You have it electronically. We have it in hard copy as well.
When is the next one?
When is the next Inside Grand Rapids? I think probably not till spring. We just had one a week ago. Yeah. We have Leadership Grand Rapids. That's a 9-month course. It meets 1 day a month, and it's for the individuals looking at how they can bring their passion into volunteerism in the community, but we make sure that they know the platform of what's going on in Grand Rapids. So platform thinking, how does this one thing, when it changes, when housing changes, how does it impact education? When business changes, how does it impact housing? So we spend 9 months, 1 day a week together, or 1 day a month for 9 months together, looking at all of this. Currently, we have 4 of our graduates running for elected office right now, locally.
Called Leadership Grand Rapids?
Leadership Grand Rapids. So they're running for local boards because they feel with the insight they now have, and whatever it's generational difference or gender difference or whatever it is, they have a perspective to contribute that they think is missing from that opportunity. We also have a program for millennials, and it happens every year from May through July. And it's a mini Inside Grand Rapids, but it's helping to make sure that young talent understands that we have a cool city. It's vibrant. These are your opportunities for you to feel connected. You told us this is what it means for you to have a sense of belongingness, and we make sure those things happen. It's through education, it's through tours, it's hands-on volunteerism and problem solving, business problem solving that they'll do in that time frame as well. We have the Institute for Healing Racism, and it looks at how does racism or racial inequity show up today. We've seen some of it in the economic gap, but we look at why, not just the numbers, but why is that? How does that happen? We have a lot of things that happen based on the fact of institutional practices of 100 years ago. So how do we recognize that today and improve that for the well-being of the region? So we think about, are you ready to build a more diverse workforce? You want an inclusive community? Here's some things that you can do. So we believe at the Grand Rapids Chamber it's an economic imperative. We need to attract the talent here. We know that we have high-level technical careers that are currently not filled. We need more engineers. We need more welders. We have more than 400 welding jobs available in Michigan right now. When the economy turned down, we had so many of those skilled talent leave, and the thought that working in manufacturing is the idea of a dirty work environment, and it's so technical now. It requires computer skills. But what's happening is we have free training to retool so that we can run these machines, but we have open jobs we can't fill. So if we want to get the talent here, we have to have the talent believe that this is a place for them. That's just one component of workforce. I mean, there's all kinds. We have the STEM workforce groups that we need to engage, as well as those working in skilled labor. So our job as a chamber is to work with the community. We have members, and we specifically focus on what their needs are, and we also have programming specifically targeted to the community, regardless of membership. Everything that comes out of my department is focused on community. Membership is not required. Can I answer any questions about what I presented or ideas that you have? Yes? No, that's an interesting topic. Personally, I would say yes. That's not Sonia Chambers talking. This is Sonia talking. And so what gentrification, what happens is you bring back the vitality of an area and you make it inhabitable for those that live there because they can't afford to live there anymore. So you see where Wealthy Street is building up, and you have great restaurants there, and some of those homes were sold for $40,000, and they're over $200,000 now. You build them, you clean them up, it's great, but now the rent goes up and the folks can't afford to live there anymore. Or there's amenities that those that live in the neighborhood can't afford to access, and that's the conversation about gentrification. You bring something up, but you push those out that actually call that area home.
Well, that has a lot of areas which offer that diversity. So even, or like, no, not diversity, but that opportunity. Like if you know, you might not be able to live in Wealthy, but there are a lot of other areas where you still have a very low price point
Yes.
housing. But
Yes.
I think many other cities don't have that anywhere within their city.
Yes.
Grand Rapids, I think, have it.
We have,
From Ball, if you go west side, you have a lot of areas where you have
we do.
a low price point.
And so when you live in a community and it changes and you have to move because you can't afford it, that's that feeling of, I lost my sense of belongingness. I can't live here anymore. I can live over here, but I can't live where I called home. And so some of that sensitivity around that. Now, Rockford Construction just did a presentation about the work they're doing on the west side, and they're purposely doing mixed income. They're purposely bringing in housing before they develop the rest of it. And they told us they learned about what happened on Wealthy. And although it's good and they were involved there and there's great things there, it wasn't great for everyone. And so there are things that they're doing as well as they develop the west side, but the design for that is outstanding. If you have not seen their full design, check out their website. Yes?
What is the chamber seeing and doing relative to the diversity from outside of the United States and other countries' immigration? A lot of what we talk about has been the issues within the state or the states right now from the existing makeup of the population and that, you know, the black population and things like that. But what about more the movement now for a lot of international movement coming in for different reasons? Are you, what's the chamber's take on that? I mean, it doesn't seem like that's been a whole lot of what we're hearing today.
It is not. The international diversity, the international ethnic groups, that's not a focus of my department, so I can't intelligently speak to all that's going on there. We do have an advocacy team that works in Lansing, and we all know that Bingoy from Grand Rapids has been put in a position that he can really influence the state. He is in constant communication with the chamber. He's a former chair of the Grand Rapids Chamber Board of Directors and has been a member for years and is still a friend of the chamber. He was just here last week speaking at one of our events. So we are constantly informed of what's going on, and we know when it's best for us to step in and bring the voice or inform our members of what's happening. When you look at what we're doing as far as helping the internationals feel like this community is their own, we do a lot of concierge service for that. I don't know if many of you understand that the federal government has deemed Grand Rapids area one of the best places to bring individuals in from different countries that are coming from areas of whether it's war or disease, but if you're resettling folks, they're seeing Grand Rapids as one of the places to do that. And we have more than 52 different ethnic languages spoken in the Kentwood public school system. And you will see the majority of resettlement or those coming in happening in that section of the greater Grand Rapids area. So each of them have cultural centers, and there's a lot of training happening. November 20th, the Chamber's Diversity Inclusion Forum will do a piece on cultural intelligence, and Alan Hedboom, who's a specialist in intercultural languages and cultural norms, will be presenting. He does a lot of work with the populations that we're talking about now, helping the internationals understand cultural norms and helping the workspace, especially HR professionals, understand cultural norms of others coming from outside of the U.S. Other questions? Okay. GrandRapids.org is the Chamber website. You can sign up for free communications if you want additional information. If you get on the site and you don't know exactly what you're looking for, just do a search. Do talent, do diversity, do inclusion, events, they'll all surface for you. And then justgrowth.org is the website that I referenced the book from. And you'll see both the co-authors there, and there's links to their other studies as well. All right. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.